Now let's have a look at another example. In this example, it's another website that says, check whether a website is up. So as always, we're going to type in google.com. This comes back and says, hey, website is up. Obviously, we can't use a file etc password because it's being filtered, but also this is a blind SSRF. So whatever IP address we give it, it's going to tell us if there is a HTTP response for it, whether or not if the website is up. So in this case, if we hit a 404, because again, from our previous examples, we know that the metadata IP address for DigitalOcean comes back with a 404. So if I type this in, it says invalid HTTP response, but now we're going to give it an invalid IP address. This IP address is not available. It should come back and say request failed. So when it comes down to a blind SSRF, you want to pay attention to how the application behaves. In some cases, the application may even come back and say something like, for this case, we're doing 22, says request failed. Let's try a port like 10,000. As you can see, it's taking a little bit longer in some cases to load and give us an answer. So I'm going to try port 80. Let's actually do localhost for this one. We're going to try localhost port 80. That comes back and says, hey, you have access to localhost. So that proves that there is an SSRF here. We are pretty much accessing a local network. So I'm going to try same thing with the IP address. So it's, we see that there is some sort of a blind SSRF with some restrictions, and we need to do a bypass, in which case we were able to do a localhost. Now we're going to try another port on localhost. That comes back and says request failed fairly quickly. Now let's try port 10,000, same thing, and so on. So the point of this is you want to scan as many different ports as you can to kind of prove that this SSRF has access to some sort of an internal network, where it allows you to either enumerate the space that they're in, so the local private network, and you can also check for the open ports that may be available. So play around with it. Always observe the responses. It may not be verbose. In some cases, you may actually have the issue of the website taking way too long to respond. In that case, you know that that port isn't open. So you can time it. If a response comes back very quickly like this one, we know that we have access to it, versus giving it something that doesn't exist at all. So for this instance, we're giving it a little bit of a different IP address. It takes a little bit longer than something that is available and comes back fairly quickly. So again, I want to make sure you take this away from this example that blind SSRFs are very tricky. You just have to play around and understand how they work, and then make sure that you're paying attention to how long it takes to load each resource and kind of look at those weird behaviors.